Today I wanted to talk a little more about painting with a small travel palette because I've been doing a little bit of traveling and I've been trying to get my art supplies down so that I can only take a few things with me. I seem to take less and less when I go away, and I've been experimenting with this new little Skechers palette that I got from Cotman, and it has only 12 colors in it, but the 12 colors are really beautiful colors, and they mix together in such a way that you can get a full range of colors out of this little sketch box. So I want to share that with you, what I found about it, and then I'll do a little demo on a painting and we'll talk about how I mix the colors. So let's hop inside and we'll get started. So here's a little study that I did, and this is one of the pictures that I did from the botanical garden in Italy when I was traveling. And then I redrew this, and I'm going to do another small study. And it's, since I work in a series and I very often paint for my own paintings, I may do a larger version of this on a panel or board in either oil or acrylic. I tend to like to work in a series, and I love anytime I can add an animal into a painting. So, this is a very small set of watercolors, as I said before. So the 12 colors are lemon yellow hue, cadmium yellow, cadmium red light, alizarin crimson, ultramarine blue, cerulean blue, viridian, sap green, and then my favorite earth tones are included: yellow ochre, burnt sienna, burnt umber, and then white. So when I'm beginning a watercolor painting, I work my way around the paper, and people often ask me how I get really saturated colors. I build a little puddle in the little pans, and that's what I'm using to paint with. I tend to work really wet, and I go around the painting and I add very saturated areas of color. So I'm really building a very saturated wet puddle in each of the pans, and that's what I'm using to paint with. Now, watercolor does not like to flow where the paper is dry. So as long as you don't touch colors to colors while they're still wet, you can really get very juicy on your paper. It should not flow as long as you're on a level surface. It shouldn't flow where the paper isn't wet. So unless you've pre-wet your paper, for an effect, like you want to work wet into wet and you want to add a whole bunch of drippy colors, you shouldn't have any problems whatsoever. If you do want to work very close to another wet color, you need to leave the finest, smallest little line. Like right here, that red flower is really wet, so I just left a little bit of a white line around the edge and I can go almost all the way up. If you're working on really good absorbent watercolor paper, and this is a really good quality mixed media paper. This is Fabriano, and it's like 135-pound mixed media paper, and their watercolor paper is wonderful too. It does absorb the paper in such a nice way. I prefer the hot press paper, which is the smooth paper. Some people like the bumpy paper. I feel like the hot press paper is easier to control, and that's why I use it. But everybody has their own personal preference, and until you really figure out what you like best, I would say to try both. Try the hot press, try the cold press. The hot press, of course, is the smooth, and the cold press is the bumpy. Some brands are bumpier than others. Fabriano is one of my favorite kinds. I like Arches as well. It's a wonderful brand. Very expensive. There are other ones that are not as expensive, and I do prefer at least 140-pound paper. Normally, it's just not going to buckle. Right here, this is the mixed media paper, which is 135. It's almost like a 140-pound paper, and I don't have it taped, and it's it's holding up really well with the amount of water I'm using, and it's not buckling on me. A lot of times when I'm working, I will tape the paper to a board or a piece of cardboard or something, and if I have a decent weight paper, it's not as important to do that because you can just paint and not have to worry about your paper curling up. That's one of the main reasons you don't want to use something like a 90-pound paper, because that will absolutely happen. So I tend to work all around the paper and go from one place to another, so that allows other places in the painting to dry, and that way we're never having colors running together that we don't want running together. And as I work my way around the paper, I can let other places start to begin to absorb themselves into the paper, and I don't have to worry about colors touching if I don't want them to blend. Now, as I said before, watercolor does not want to go where the paper is dry. So you'll see in a lot of places I have complementary colors right next to each other, which gives a really dynamic pop of color, which is what we want. So I have red and green right next to each other, and very often I will put blue next to orange, which I have right on the top of the cat's head, and that's because I like that dynamic pop. But I'm usually very, very careful to make sure that those complements don't touch each other when they're wet. It's really important. If they are a little bit damp, I always leave a very small white line in between the two colors so that they don't mix unintentionally. If we want to create a dark neutral, we can put them together intentionally, and that's how we would create a black or a dark neutral color. You can create deep, deep browns, deep, deep grays, charcoal gray, black, by mixing those complementary colors intentionally. But when we are trying to avoid that, we need to either leave like that little space in between the two parts of the painting that we don't want to mix if they're wet, or you have to let it really dry. Now, distinguishing your greens, what I do is I definitely take the greens I have and then add more warmth by adding yellow, or coolness by adding blue to the existing greens that I have. Now here, I think you can see at the top of the page I added a little bit of green where the red was, and I accidentally created a little bit of mud. Now, when you hear somebody say that you created mud, it just means you unintentionally created a neutral by mixing your complements. And you can not do that by doing some of the things I just said. Just leaving yourself space and waiting till things dry. I corrected it immediately with a paper towel. You can also use a baby wipe. Those are really, really helpful when you can pull areas out with a baby wipe or a paper towel or a damp paper towel if you go in quickly. Now, I'm creating a very dark neutral or a black to bring in some very dark values. And that just kind of gives you a little bit of darkness, and you always want to include some dark values in your painting. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing, as it really does help this channel grow, and I do appreciate it so much. Please come again soon.